This is Hofstra's Campus Conversations, the official podcast of Hofstra University's leadership team, focusing on issues of importance to Hofstra and higher education. Now welcome today's host, Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs, Charlie Riordan.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Hofstra's Campus Conversations. Today we're going to delve into one of my favorite topics, one that's a distinguishing characteristic of American universities, research and scholarly excellence. As recently announced and discussed in a prior episode, Hofstra has been designated an R2 institution by the Carnegie Classification of Institutions of Higher Education. R2 is a term reserved for what are called, quote, high research spending and doctorate production universities. This designation recognizes the quantity, the breadth, and impact of faculty research benefiting both students and society. According to the U.S. Department of Education, there are approximately 4,000 institutions of higher education in our country. Only about 8% of those are categorized as either R1 or R2, placing Hofstra in a select group of the most impactful universities. Joining me today to talk about their incredible research journeys are Luciana Santoferrara, Associate Professor of Biology, and Ehsan Nikbakht, the CV Star Distinguished Professor in Finance and International Financial Services and Professor of Finance. Both were named Researchers of the Year during the last academic year. Congratulations and welcome to Campus Conversations.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks so much for this exciting opportunity to share our research.
Thank you very much. I'm glad I'm here.
Thank you both. So let's go ahead and get started to get to know you a little bit better. Luciana, we'll start with you. What sparked your passion for biology? And tell us a little bit about your journey that led you to Hofstra.
I was that nerdy kid playing with red paper to make fake blood or observing the behavior of ants, and of course, most of the time just by myself. Now, I grew up in low to mid-class neighborhood in the suburbs of Buenos Aires, Argentina. I was a first-generation student since middle school, so I really didn't have any role models to guide me through science. It was only towards the end of my undergraduate studies when I became a microbiology teaching assistant. One of the professors there recruited me to work in their research lab. That was really a transformative experience for me. That's when I learned that one could be a scientist for a job. Right. And so at that time, I switched my career path from what was going to be biomedical career into a research career. So I went for my PhD in biology. Then I emigrated to the US for my postdoctoral training. Now it has been 4 years almost since I had the great opportunity to join Hofstra and become here a professor where I can fulfill my teaching dreams as well as building my own research lab.
Fantastic. So when you thought about biomedical versus a research career, talk a little bit about what it got you interested into an educational research career, teaching as well as research.
So the main trigger was finally getting to work at the hospital and not liking it and having that real life experience and finding that that's not what I want to do for the rest of my life. And so that makes me value so much. Since we do a lot here at Hofstra that is exposing our students to experiential learning and seeing what the reality is in different paths, because many of our students want to be doctors, but They don't really have that experience yet. So for me, that was really important. I still knew that I wanted to work with microorganisms, microbes, but I switched into an environmental field rather than a biomedical one.
That's great, and I think it's so important to appreciate that exposing our students to different opportunities, it's the ones that you're drawn to and sometimes the ones that you experience that tell you that's not the direction you want to head can be equally enlightening. That's fantastic. Thank you for that. Ehsan, now your turn. How did you become interested in your life's work? And tell us a little bit about your journey here at Hofstra.
Thank you, Charlie. In mid-70s, I came from Iran to the U.S. and I went to George Washington University and I studied finance. How I became interested in teaching, I think it goes back to my childhood. I would say most of us are influenced by parents, teachers, and friends.
Right.
My father was an educator. He was a good educator. I remember when I was a kid, he was taking me to classes. So I knew I would be a teacher. I didn't know that I would be a university professor, but I knew that I would be a teacher. At undergrad, I had a wonderful professor who was giving wonderful lectures in economics and finance. he gave me that direction that maybe I should continue. So 1982, I finished George Washington. I joined Hofstra in the same year. I was a department chair, as you may know. And then I went back to faculty. In fact, for 6 years, I served as an associate dean. By then, Charlie, the school had a dean and one associate dean.
Right.
And in the 1994, actually, I was there when, a lot of good things happened. School was named after Zarp in 1994. And then, after 5-6 years, I went back to faculty. In the last 35 years, I've been focusing on my research and teaching. Yes.
Fantastic. Well, we'll certainly get more into that. So you've certainly had a very long and distinguished career here at Hofstra. So let's get into some more of the details. And Luciana, back to you. So you are a microbial ecologist, as you mentioned. You're always interested in microbes. Can you break that down a little bit in layman's terms? And what exactly does a microbial ecologist do?
Yes. So microbes influence our planet and human well-being in an incredible amount of ways, which many of us are not aware of. So as a microbial ecologist, I study the impacts of microbes on marine ecosystems, and marine microorganisms do plenty of things, including half of the photosynthesis of our entire planet. They provide oxygen for us. They feed larger marine organisms, they break down waste, and many other crucial roles. So I recently received an NSF award to study microorganisms in relation to an environmental problem that we have really close by to us in Long Island Sound. The western part of the Sound experience a phenomenon called hypoxia every summer. Hypoxia means low oxygen in the water. This is a consequence of pollution, but is mediated in many ways by the microbes in the water. So it's not the fault of the microbes, it's the fault of the pollution, but microbes have a very important interaction with those pollutants that lead to the low oxygen in the water. Imagine you take a cup of water in the western part of Long Island Sound. You will have there thousands of different types of microbes. They are doing different things in the water. Some of them may overgrow because they actually like that pollution. Some others may be stealing oxygen from the water, while others may suffer by the fact that there is such a low oxygen there. So with my current project, what my team and I are trying to do is to build this kind of a puzzle of what are the microbes there and what are they doing. So every summer we go out in the field, we measure environmental quality parameters in the water, we get water samples and bring back in the lab, where we then do many different analyses involving microscopes, involving DNA sequencing. And a big part of our research involves computational bioinformatic analysis. So what we hope to learn with this research is what are the specific ways in which microbes may be causing this hypoxia, in particular in our system of study in the Western Long Island Sound? What are the broader impacts, for example, for other microbes as well as larger organisms living in the water? And in the long term, we also hope to contribute information that's going to be important to try to prevent this hypoxia problem.
Right. I mean, it's hard to get my head around the thought that in a cup of water you have thousands of different microbes. Are there any microbes in that part of Long Island Sound that are unique to that body of water?
We haven't found that yet, and the most likely reason is that microbes are so tiny and multiply so fast that they are very good at dispersing. So if you take that cup of water in Long Island Sound or in some other, this is an estuary, it's an interface between all the rivers that end in the Long Island Sound area as well as the ocean that is adjacent to it. So if you go in some other estuary of South America or Asia, you are very likely to find the same type of microbes, but the activities they may be doing may change. They do change, in fact, based on the particular environmental conditions at that location and also at that time where you go and collect your sample of water. If you go later, you may find something different.
Right, right. And so it sounds like your studies are also longitudinal in the sense that you'll be doing this year after year and see how climate change, for example, is impacting the microbial environment?
Yes, this is a multi-year research. It started actually with Hofstra funding. When I joined Hofstra and received my startup funding and additional support that we get through the university every year. And that allowed me to collect preliminary data and then convince the NSF that this research was worth of additional funding. So with that, we are going to continue several more years. And then, we hope to grow this research over the years because, as you say, to study larger impacts such as climate change, we need a much longer time series. But we do hope to continue that for multiple years and get to ask those questions.
No, fantastic. Thanks for bringing your research to life. Ehsan, we'll turn to you now. Different and complementary topics, perhaps. So over your career, your research interests have spanned international finance, portfolio management, hedge funds, real estate, financial blockchain. That's really quite a range, Ehsan. Can you give us some sense of what you're currently interested in with regard to your research here at Hofstra?
To answer that question, I need to go back where I started. When I was a doctoral student, the topic I chose was about the risk assessment of the foreign loans given by banks to developing countries. I was wondering, how come all these developing countries borrow, and everybody says capital is the engine of growth, but nothing happens? So I consulted with some professors. He said, you need to focus on risk. After all, finance is about risk, growth, and basically anything related to that, like, cash flow. So I've done research in different settings, as you made the observation, but they have one in common. The focus has been risk mitigation, risk analysis. When I did that doctoral thesis, I looked at the risk assessment of those loans. In fact, that research received one of the first Stetson Prize in 1984 when Lawrence Stetson, started. He was in a school of communication, and he was, actually communication major, and he was a management professor. Then I shifted to international finance. There were some new products coming called ADR, American Deposit Receipts. For example, a company in Germany wants to come to the U.S. So how do you assess the risk of that new product? Because it was something new. Then on and on, hedge funds. Hedge funds are started. Then we ask ourselves, what are the characteristics of the portfolio managers, hedge fund managers, who manage risk better? It was very interesting. It's a little bit, controversial. One of the factors was, do we need to be a finance major to manage risk in hedge funds? Not necessarily. And that goes back to the interdisciplinary topic that you and I talk. Because very often I bring up, when our students go to industry, when they receive problems do not come in the form of finance, marketing, management, psychology, computer science, and biology. Problems are problems. So we ask that, what are the characteristics of those hedge fund managers who manage risk better? And finance was not the prerequisite to be a successful hedge fund manager. Fast forward, cryptocurrency came, all this blockchain. And then I got into the blockchain to see right now, if let's say the total value of stocks in the United States is about, I would say, 60 trillion, we have about 2 trillion Bitcoins. So it's growing. 2 trillion, yes, compared to 60 trillion is nothing. By the way, compared to the GDP, 60 trillion to 30 trillion, the buffer is 2 to 1.
Right.
So how do we mitigate this risk? How do we want to make sure that these assets who might be interested in this topic? In portfolio management that you brought up, in fact, I'm lucky to be teaching in the trading room. Trading room was started in 2007 when my good friend, Ralph Palomini was the dean, and I commend him. He went for it, and with the help of finance faculty, the trading room started, and that's, where I teach. Students sit down in front of a computer, terminal, Bloomberg terminal. By the way, Charlie, a number of schools may have Bloomberg terminals, but not every school has a terminal that the students and faculty can get access, put it in Excel, do all kinds of statistical work. So most of these, terminals that we see in some libraries in different universities, basically it's like a book, you read them.
Right.
Whereas, in that trading room, students will, and my question for them, looking to the risk assessment of those stocks. Back to your question, although I've done research in different settings, the theme is the same, risk management.
So you mentioned at the beginning of your answer the international aspect or developing countries. So I'm just curious, I guess, where my mind goes in the world climate that we're in today and a lot of dynamic change with respect to governments and the forms of governments that are leading countries. So does any of your research touch on the role of the state government and the type of government it is in terms of how that impacts risk?
Right. Not directly. I have to be very careful in terms of distinction between finance, which is basically dealing with companies,
Right.
firms, applied microeconomics, versus econ, which is more broader. I would leave that
Fair
big
enough.
topic for the economists, but indirectly sometimes I touch on that. I'm more of portfolio aspect, that looking at the correlation among all these currencies. So under what circumstances, under what conditions these, crypto assets will get into the huge, fluctuation, what kind of implication they have for the portfolio managers. Or in the area of stocks, we all have interest in stocks and TIA. What are the factors affecting the risk-reward ratio or portfolio? And later, I'll talk about some research done by students as well in this area.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. That really brings it to life, I think, in very powerful ways. Thank you for that, Ehsan. So
Thank you.
one of the benefits, Ehsan touched on this, is conducting leading-edge research on our campus is the opportunity for our undergraduates to engage in scholarly projects with our faculty. So I'm going to ask each of you in turn to give an example of how you engage undergraduate students in your work and how these opportunities have transformed students. Perhaps there's one example or two that you would like to highlight. So Luciana, again, let's start with you.
One of the distinctive features at Hofstra is that we are very intentional about engaging our undergraduate students in authentic experiences, including research. In particular, in the biology department, our curriculum is designed to engage students in research from their first semester. We believe that this offers excellent opportunities for students to build a multitude of skills and experiences that they need for a successful career, regardless of their chosen path, right? So recruiting great students to participate in my lab has been really easy. We have great students that have the proper training for it. At Hofstra, we also value being close to our students, being easily approachable to them so that they can talk to us about their interests and also for us to know them. I've recruited students through them coming to me or me recruiting them through my classes in the same way I was recruited when I was an early scientist, right? So regarding the impact of those research experiences on students, we hear so many good news from our students after they graduate. Students that went on into diverse and really successful careers in biotechnology companies, in research in either basic fields as well as applied research in the biomedical fields and so on. To give an example of one of my recent students that graduated from our dual BS, MS, Bachelor and Master of Science degrees, she was telling me how taking my microbiology class sparked her curiosity, led her to understand how these tiny bugs, right, can have so many impactful influences on our planet. That motivated her to join my lab. She did a couple years of research, and then again she switched her career path to go into research, and she's now applying for the PhD programs in environmental microbiology. She wants to work on biotechnological applications of microbes in biodegradation, and she hopes to make a difference by finding microbes that can help us harness applications of economical relevance, such as in the oil industry, but also do this in the most environmentally friendly possible way.
Fantastic. And I'm really glad you were able to highlight the direct contact and interaction between yourself as a faculty member and the undergraduate students, because I think that is one of the distinguishing characteristics of Hofstra, in that if you're at a larger R1 institution, for example, the undergraduates may have research opportunities, and they do, but they're often guided by other graduate students or postdocs. But here we take a lot of pride, and you're literally elbow to elbow with your students in the lab.
Exactly.
That's
Yes.
fantastic. Ehsan, let's turn to you. Tell us how you engage students in your scholarly work.
Thank you for asking that question. Very often I advise students that you all will graduate, but not everybody will have a resume to stand out. How can you make your resume stand out? One way to make a resume to stand out is to do research. Find a professor that you're comfortable with and do some research. I remember a student, very bright now, he's a credit analyst, Akshay Dam, came to my office. Professor, I want to listen to your advice. What kind of research should I do? I said, are you ready? I found out that he's the honor student at honor college. So I told him, first, you take this one as an honors option. And then I think he received some sort of, stipend from honors college. Honors college has certain, exactly.
Some funding.
So now we got to the point, what kind of, topic we should work on. I said, actually, I'm a risk person. I analyze risk, and I want you to do some risk analysis in the area of, finance, anything. So we walked to the trading room, and I wanted to retrieve some data on, let's say, stocks, bonds, real estate investment trust, blah, blah, blah. I said, with what you learn in Finance 132, 133, by the way, these are investment courses, if I give you, let's say, some funds, hypothetical, $1 million, first start with 50-50 between stocks and bond. See what happens to those proxies that we talk about, like risk-reward ratio, Sharpe ratio. I don't want to get into technical terms. Proxies for risk-reward ratio. Okay, professor, I've done that one. The risk-reward ratio, the lower the better, is, let's say, 1. I said, now, okay, go and collect more data and put some real estate investment trust in them to see what happens. Now with 3, the risk-reward ratio goes lower and lower, on and on. And then I became curious. I told him, I'm not recommending investment in Bitcoin, but out of curiosity, let's put 5%, 10% in, let's say, Bitcoin. By the way, Bitcoin is about 60% of the crypto asset. When he put 5%, in terms of risk, it goes all the way high, but when you adjust it for return, it gets, better. So Akshay became so fascinated about this portfolio diversification and also the impact of crypto asset. How would that impact the risk? Now he's practicing as a wonderful credit analyst on the street. By the way, this has implications for our TIA. In TIA, we cannot, do investment in every instrument, by the way. I have a number of stories similar to that. The students will come to the office. How can I make my resume stand out? I give them 2, 3, proposal ideas. They go to this wonderful Bloomberg trading room. They collect the data, do all kind of statistical work, and they do some literature review.
Right.
They feel good about it, and some of them graduate with honors.
I think that's such a great framework because as students are coming to Hofstra or coming to university, and families are, they're really looking for that return on investment or what job they're going to create. So I like the framework you set, which is to envision what your resume should look like when you graduate to make you most competitive, and then sort of work backwards and build it out during your time here.
Along the same line, if the students listen to this podcast, thank you, Charlie. This is your initiative, Faculty Focus. Try to make your resume stand out in different ways. Do some research. Do not leave school without doing some internship. If possible, become a TA to a professor to work with.
Right.
Be active in a student clubs. These are the entries on resume that will make your resume stand out.
That's right. And all those opportunities exist. It's a matter of taking a step forward.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on a challenge that's looming over higher education research, more narrowly in the current year. And there are changes to federal research funding that could have a big, big impact, especially when it comes to the topic of indirect costs, also known as overhead or F&A, facilities administrative costs on grants. Luciana, you mentioned earlier that you have an active National Science Foundation award supporting your laboratory's research program. As our listeners know, the federal government is proposing to cap indirect costs at 10% for the National Institutes of Health, but there's concern that that could spread to all federal agencies, including the NSF. Could you share just a little bit what this cap might mean to your lab's ability to get work done and your ability to support our students in the lab?
So for my team to do research, we need a functional laboratory. The portion of federal funding that is called indirect costs is really what helps the university pay the bills, so that we have basic things such as electricity and water, that we can have the help of janitors to clean up our lab, and the support of IT specialists to help us run our computational analysis. Just to cite a few examples, part of those indirect costs, very importantly, also come back to our department so that we can provide summer fellowships, again, for our undergraduate students to engage in research. So these indirect costs in favor of the university are really crucial to our research, especially to our mission of training and educating the next generations of scientists.
Excellent. That's such an important issue, and I really appreciate you breaking it down for our listeners. So Luciana and Ehsan, thank you very much for this great conversation. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to learn more about your scholarly interests and the fantastic work that you're doing. Your work is certainly inspiring, and it's clear that Hofstra's research and scholarly impact is even stronger than ever. Congratulations again to each of you on being named a Researcher of the Year, and thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Charlie. It was my pleasure.
Thanks, Charlie. This was a great opportunity to share our research and the impact on the students.
And thanks to the audience for listening, and look forward to the next episode of Campus Conversations.